The forest is awake. What time is it where you are? And from where do you listen? Subscribe and hear what hides in the dark. I grew up on a stretch of land tucked behind Rattlesnake Ridge, an expanse of farmland and forest that stretched farther than my young eyes could measure. For most of my childhood, it felt like my personal playground. My older brother and I spent countless afternoons chasing each other across the fields. And if we wanted a change of pace, we'd wander down to this cluster of thin alder trees off the lower pasture. The trunks were so flexible that you could climb halfway up, then lean forward and ride them back down like a giant springboard. It was a thrill, branches snapping beneath us, the ground rushing up, both of us whooping with excitement. That was our world. Wide open, full of life and possibility. One autumn day, everything changed. I remember the bite of the crisp air, the hint of damp moss as we hiked the gentle slope toward our favorite bendy alders. The two of us were already knee-deep in mud by the time we reached them, eager for the adrenaline we got from swaying to the ground. Snap, crash. Just normal everyday noises that went along with our games. We knew what breaking branches sounded like. Small twigs made a quick pop. Thicker ones created this deeper crack. It never scared us. Not until we heard something that shouldn't have been there. We'd just finished a round of our makeshift tree surfing when a different kind of snapping started echoing through the grove. Louder, heavier. It cut through the air with a force I'd never experienced. My brother glanced at me, his smile twisting into alarm, and I realized he heard it too. We both froze. The cracking sounds kept rolling in, growing louder with each second, as if logs 2 or 3 times thicker than the ones we were playing on were being torn apart. I tried to make sense of it. We knew the rumble of bulldozers and tractors. Our dad worked those machines all the time. But this was different. Like some massive presence was crushing trunks underfoot. It felt too random, too wild for any piece of equipment. The worst part was we couldn't see the source of the noise. The trees formed a wall of leafy shadows around us, and beyond that, everything felt eerily dim. Suddenly, it all stopped. Not gradually. One second it was there, the next it was dead quiet. We were left standing with our breath ragged, our heads craned, scanning the alders for a glimpse of whatever was out there. A cold prickle of dread coiled in my gut. The land we knew so well felt strange and unwelcoming, like something dangerous was lurking just beyond our sight. My brother started to whisper something, maybe to tell me to head back, when a roar, or a howl, I don't even know how to label it, ripped through the silence. It was so powerful I could practically feel it in my chest. Every hair on my neck prickled, and my legs seemed to move on their own, stumbling backward away from the tree line. My brother was right beside me, muttering words under his breath that I couldn't make out. We didn't linger to see if the creature, if that's what it was, would step into view. We tore up that slope, sliding on loose gravel, nearly colliding with each other in our haste. I remember the metallic taste of adrenaline in my mouth. When we reached the house, we barged in through the back door, panting so hard it took a minute to speak. Our mom stood there, alarmed, but as soon as we tried to explain, babbling about snapping trees and an impossible roar, her face softened into a look I recognized all too well. Disbelief. "Probably a bear," she said. "Or you two just got yourselves worked up." No matter how hard we insisted it was bigger, louder, more frightening than any bear, she wouldn't budge. She told us to clean off our muddy shoes and go about our day. That night, though, I could barely settle into my bed. Every time I closed my eyes, my thoughts wandered back to the moment that relentless crashing fell silent, and how an unearthly roar seemed to rip through the air. The lower pasture, the place that had once felt like our personal amusement park, now felt like a different realm altogether. I wanted to forget it, chalk it up to an overactive imagination, but I couldn't push it from my mind. Later, I'd have to start waking up before dawn to feed our cattle down near those same alders. It was a chore I used to do with ease, no flashlight needed, comfortable in my own backyard. After what happened, I found myself standing at the door each morning, heart pounding as I peered outside at the black silhouettes of the trees. The thought of crossing that stretch of land made me shiver. I'd force myself to go, but every crunch of a leaf would raise the hairs on my arms. That roar played on a loop in my head. I should have known it was only the beginning. There was more to that roar than just a single terrifying afternoon. Deep down, a part of me sensed that whatever lurked in the alder grove wasn't finished leaving its mark on our property, or on me. It had been a few weeks since that day in the alder grove, and I was still on edge. During daylight, I managed to keep most of the worry tucked away, but once the sun dipped below the ridgeline, all bets were off. Sleeping became a nightly struggle. Every snapping twig outside turned my thoughts back to whatever had roared at us. My parents stuck to their theory that it was just a confused bear, though I think they noticed how tense I was each time I had to walk down to the barn. They offered no real comfort beyond that. Life on a farm meant chores didn't stop, fear or not. One evening, exhaustion finally got the better of me. I'd spent hours chasing down a stray calf and was yawning by dusk. I remember collapsing onto my bed, half dressed, drifting in and out of sleep while a slice of moonlight cut across the bedroom floor. It must have been nearly 2 in the morning when I stirred, aware of my flip clock's faint glow. The display read 1:45, those bright, illuminated numbers, casting a hazy light around the room. My eyes were gritty with fatigue, but nature was calling, so I swung my feet over the edge of the mattress. That was when I happened to glance at the window. At first, I saw just the road. We'd cleared a few trees near the house the previous summer, so I had an unobstructed view of the dirt path heading downhill. The moon was full and high, bathing everything in a faint silver tone. I blinked, trying to decide if my mind was playing tricks, because off to the right, near the tree line, there was something moving. It stepped into clearer view, tall, broad, and unlike any person I'd ever seen. Even at night I could make out the dark shape of towering shoulders. Its head looked proportionately big, though I couldn't see details. The fence down there was about 5 feet tall, yet the figure's torso hovered well above it. I froze, watching as it took 2 strides across the road. That's how I knew it wasn't human. No one could cross that span so quickly, let alone look so massive in the process. There was an unsettling grace to its movements, like it could glide without effort. My thoughts drifted back to that explosive roar in the alder grove, and a jolt of dread coursed through me. I realized it might be the same thing, some unknown creature roaming our land, crossing the pasture under the moon's gaze. Any hope that I'd imagined everything before evaporated in that moment. Panicking, I reached over to flip my clock face down, afraid that even that mild glow might give away my presence. Then I inched myself lower on the mattress, doing my best to slip out of view. Every breath felt like it echoed through the entire room. 1,000 questions tore through my mind. Would it come closer? Could it peer into my window if it wanted to? I had never felt so vulnerable, pressed into the creaking springs of my own bed. Outside, the figure vanished behind the angled slope of the hill. I lay there in the darkness, unmoving, praying it would keep going. My heart pounded against my ribcage, and each passing second crawled by. I considered jumping up to close the curtains, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Too risky. After a while, silence settled back in, broken only by the croak of a frog somewhere near the stream. Still, I stayed pinned in place. The urge to flee or scream battled with the instinct to remain absolutely still. Dawn eventually sneaked in through the window, orange light stretching across the floor. Only then did I dare to move. My body ached from being tensed all night, and my eyes felt gritty from lack of sleep. No matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't dismiss what I'd witnessed. Whatever I'd seen was real, and it was big. I had no doubt it was connected to the ruckus in the alder grove. Part of me wanted to warn everyone, shout that we needed to barricade the house. But I also knew my parents would just shake their heads. My brother might believe me. He'd heard that roar too. But I wasn't sure how much more I could say before sounding hysterical. That morning, the chore list was waiting for me as usual, pinned to the fridge. I had no choice but to head outside again, the memory of that giant silhouette still etched in my mind. The world felt just a little less secure, and I realized with growing unease that I might never view our farm the same way again. The morning after I spotted that silhouette outside my window, I tried one last time to convince my parents something far bigger than any bear roamed our property. My mother cut me off with a patient smile, telling me to worry less about monsters and more about my chores. My dad, equally skeptical, suggested I pack some pepper spray if I was so nervous. It was maddening. Only my older brother believed me, and that was mostly because he'd been there in the alder grove when the forest erupted with that terrifying roar. Even then, I sensed a flicker of doubt in his eyes, like he wondered if maybe I was overhyping the nighttime sighting. Still, I couldn't let it go. Every trip to the barn, every trek to the far pasture, I found myself scanning the tree line for anything out of place. At night, I'd lie awake, listening for heavy footsteps or another earth-shaking roar. Sleep became rare. Each day, I was more convinced our land wasn't ours alone. When my brother finally admitted he was tired of tossing and turning himself, we made a pact to figure it out, or at least confront whatever was lurking. We waited until the moon rose high again, just shy of full. Under the cover of darkness, we snuck out of the house with a flashlight and a hand-me-down camera. We agreed to stake out the edge of the property line near the dirt road, where I'd last seen that colossal figure. The night was cold enough to sting our lungs when we breathed, and the air felt heavy with apprehension. Beyond the faint ring of our flashlight's beam, the world was a black canvas. Even the barn, usually a comforting sight, looked like a looming shape of wooden slats and rusted metal. At first we heard only the hum of crickets and an occasional distant shuffle from the cattle. Then a low, resonant thump reached our ears. It sounded like something incredibly large was maneuvering through the undergrowth, branches scratching together in the dark. We tensed, gripping each other's arms for support. The cattle started to move restlessly in their pen, letting out anxious moos as though sensing a nearby threat. Suddenly, a roar shattered the silence, very much like the one we'd heard weeks ago. It reverberated through my ribcage, urgent and furious. My brother fumbled with the flashlight, nearly dropping it. In that half-second of wild swinging light, I spotted a hulking outline at the far end of the pasture, partially masked by shadow. Before we could get a better look, the roar came again. It wasn't closing in. It felt more like a warning. My brother yanked me backward, and we sprinted for the house. My feet barely registered the ground. I expected to feel hot breath at my back, or sense the pounding of massive footsteps behind us. But that didn't happen. Once we reached the porch, we dared to glance over our shoulders. The pasture lay still and dark, the cattle jittery but not in full panic. The creature, if it had followed at all, had melted back into the night. The next day, our parents noted how rattled we looked, but no miraculous conversion happened. Still, the two of us had our proof, at least in our own minds. We knew something had chosen our property as part of its domain. I asked myself if we should call the police or maybe some wildlife official, but all I had was a murky outline and a roar that defied any normal explanation. In the end, we settled into an unspoken deal. We'd be more careful, move quietly around the lower fields, and leave it to its own territory. Over time, the nights became calmer for us. I never forgot the heft of that roar or the powerful shape that left me trembling. But it seemed content to keep its distance if we kept ours. I like to think our land holds more than meets the eye, a slice of raw wilderness where man doesn't fully reign. Sometimes I still wonder if I should have fought harder for the world to believe my story. Then again, maybe this strange truce was exactly what let life go on, and that was enough for me. I used to think my parents' place was the epitome of ordinary, cookie-cutter neighborhood at the base of some foothills, complete with a neat little fence and a paved driveway. But everything shifted once I found that obscure path just off the canyon road. It's hidden behind a thin screen of trees, and the sign is either so faded or small that most people wouldn't notice it even if they were looking. I stumbled across it thanks to a hunch and a friend's random tip, and on the day I decided to explore it with a buddy from the Lost Creek expeditions, well, that was the afternoon everything changed. We parked near the bend in the road and got out. The chill in the air smelled like wet earth and leaf rot, which made sense because the entire slope was drenched in melting snow. The moment we stepped onto the gravel, 2 sharp cracks echoed through the trunks. My friend froze, glancing at me with a, "Did you do that?" expression. I shook my head. It was definitely coming from deeper in the trees, although the idea of random branches snapping on their own crossed my mind. I tried to laugh it off, but it felt forced. It was the first spark of suspicion that something, or someone, was aware we had arrived. The trail itself was a sloppy mess, coated with slush and fresh mud. Each step made an ugly squelching noise that shattered any semblance of silence. The canopy overhead was so thick, most of the day's light got swallowed before it touched the ground. It was like entering a tunnel of shadows. We picked our way along carefully, occasionally slipping. We only made it a few hundred feet when another pair of cracks rang out, sharper than the ones by the car. My friend threw me a nervous smile, and I tried to shrug like it was normal. On the inside I was rattled. The knocks felt deliberate, spaced just right, almost like signals or warnings. We kept moving, telling each other we were just being paranoid. Sure, it's a remote trail. Sure, it looks spooky. Could be normal forest sounds, right? Except the deeper we went, the heavier the atmosphere became, like someone had draped a wet blanket over everything. My friend pointed out how odd it was that we hadn't seen a single squirrel, bird, or even a random chipmunk. By this point, I was seriously wondering if we'd wandered into a section of woods that didn't appreciate visitors. Eventually, we reached a point where the path leveled off, and we found a small clearing. It was probably the only spot along that stretch of trail where daylight actually made it through the branches. My friend wanted to stop for a snack, so we hunkered down on an old fallen log, only half focused on the granola bars in our hands. My ears kept straining to catch even the faintest noise. That's when a third set of knocks rattled the air from somewhere up the slope. I remember locking eyes with my friend. At that moment, there was no more kidding around. We knew we weren't imagining it. Despite the growing tension, we decided to wrap up the snack break and head back. Neither of us openly admitted being uneasy, but the walk down felt much faster than the hike up. When we finally made it to the car, the weird sense of relief washed over me so hard I actually paused to catch my breath. My friend and I swapped a few hushed theories, maybe a woodpecker, maybe trees shifting in the wind, but neither of us believed it. A knot of dread seemed lodged in my gut, insisting something else was going on. I ended up returning to that trail on my own not long after. It nagged at me constantly. I'd be sitting in the living room at my folks' place, looking out at the ridges, and I'd feel this pull to go back. Every trip was the same: slick ground, murky light, an uncanny hush. The knocks were still there too, echoing sporadically as if they were following my progress. My mom eventually tagged along on one of these outings, during a cold, overcast morning. We didn't talk much until we reached the top third of the path, where a chain of knocks surrounded us from every direction. She just raised her eyebrows, unsettled but pretending she was fine. Neither of us dared speak above a whisper. At first we told ourselves it was just the forest. After all, nature can get weird. But as we headed home, the silence in the car was suffocating. We both sensed that something far stranger than random tree sounds lived up there. Even recounting it now, the memory of those cracks in the distance makes my stomach twist. Yet, I couldn't stay away. Something about that trail demanded my return, like I'd stumbled onto a secret that refused to stay hidden. Even though the experience unsettled me, I needed to know more. I needed to find out what was knocking back. I didn't realize just how deep I'd gotten into this obsession until the day I ventured up there alone again. No casual friend in tow, no group, just me and the looming wall of silent trees. I wasn't stupid. I was nervous as hell, but the urge to see if the knocks would happen again, or if something even weirder might, had me lacing up my boots anyway. So I parked my car at the usual spot and started up the trail like I had a dozen times before. Barely 10 minutes in, I heard rustles in the brush, the kind you catch at the corner of your ear when something big is moving around. I kept telling myself it could be a deer. But a few minutes later, that notion collapsed when a resounding "woo" boomed from somewhere off to my right. I froze like I'd just been caught stealing. My heart stuttered, but after a couple of breathless seconds, I did something probably insane. I answered back with my own "woo." It was more out of adrenaline than courage, like my brain hadn't gotten the memo that this was a terrible idea. The response came so fast it nearly knocked me backward, a vicious, high-pitched screech that shot through the trees. My spine prickled. The sound wasn't human, yet something about it felt eerily intentional, like an angry command. I've been out in the woods enough to know the usual suspects: owls, foxes, hawks. This wasn't any of those. It was deeper, more layered. My whole body was shaking, but I forced myself to keep calm, crouching to make a smaller silhouette in case, God forbid, whatever was out there saw me as a threat. I guess I must have sat for a while, but I couldn't tell if it was 1 minute or 10, because the whole world got so quiet I could hear my pulse in my ears. Then this new noise drifted toward me, something soft at first, like a faint panting. But it grew louder, heavier, until it felt like the breathing of an animal with a chest the size of a refrigerator. Ha, ha ha ha, ha 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 ha. Each exhale sounded closer than the last, though I couldn't pinpoint from which direction. It was as though the forest itself was breathing, massive lungs expanding in the shadows around me. Terror lit up my nerves. My brain reeled with possibilities: bear, mountain lion, or something else entirely. But something about the pattern felt calculated, like it was announcing its presence rather than creeping up for a kill. Maybe it was trying to scare me away. If so, it worked. I stood carefully, heart hammering against my ribcage, and started moving back downhill, slow enough that I wouldn't trip on the muddy slope. The moment I decided to leave, that heavy breathing cut off like a switch had been flipped. Dead silence again. There's a twisted kind of relief in being left alone, but it sure didn't feel like a blessing. More like a threat that could fire up again any time. Another time, not long after that, I spotted an odd structure near the top of the trail, under a thick old tree that had been bent and broken, yet was somehow still clinging to life. Leaning against its trunk were several sticks, long, sturdy branches arranged in a triangular shape like a teepee. I'd read about weird stick structures in online stories, but always figured they were bushcraft shelters or kids playing around. This one, though, looked too deliberate. The sticks had been placed at angles that locked them together. No random pile of deadwood could pull that off. Against my better judgment, I whipped out my phone and snapped a few photos. My breath caught in my throat. There was an unmistakable pressure in the air, like I was being watched from just outside my field of vision. You know that feeling when the hairs on your neck stand up? Multiply that by 10. I hurried back down the trail faster than I should have, half slipping in the mud, convinced I might catch a glimpse of something darting through the trees. The next day, I must have been half out of my mind, because I went up again to see if any fresh clues were waiting. At first, it seemed normal, or as normal as that place can feel. But once I was near the base of the trail, I nearly puked when I saw it. A deer carcass, or what was left of it. The skull was mostly intact, still attached to part of the spine, but the legs looked snapped, twisted. No scattering of fur or signs of a typical animal kill either. It was like it had been dropped there, right where I couldn't miss it. A jolt of horror flooded my system so fast my knees almost buckled. I remember standing there, trying to wrap my head around it, when a single notion took hold. This was left for me, because of the pictures. That was the instant I decided never to bring a camera up there again. It felt like crossing a line, as if I disrespected something that didn't appreciate prying eyes. Word of my experiences must have gotten around, because a friend who was skeptical about the whole thing pestered me to let him tag along. We went at dusk, and the knock started up almost on cue. By the time we got halfway, a series of sharp clacks echoed so loudly, you'd swear someone was whacking a tree trunk right beside us. My friend's confidence evaporated. We walked out of there in a hurry, each step mirrored by faint crunches in the undergrowth. Neither of us dared look back. I made it a personal rule. No more cameras. No more inviting people to witness it, unless they're truly prepared. The idea that I was treading on sacred ground, someone else's territory, gnawed at me constantly. Every time I ventured back, I felt a swirl of excitement and dread. Something out there was watching, maybe testing me. And after that deer skeleton incident, I wasn't eager to push any further than I had to. I wish I could say I stayed away, but that would be a lie. It's like this place has a pulse of its own, and it's synced with my curiosity, dragging me back whenever I try to ignore it. At this point, I know it's only a matter of time before something big happens, something impossible to dismiss or rationalize. Yet part of me keeps coming back for more, in spite of the warning signs piling up like stacked bones. And that, I guess, is where caution ends and obsession begins. I don't know why I kept testing my luck on that trail, but I guess part of me needed closure. Something told me the story wasn't finished, so when I heard about the second structure, it was like an invisible force tugging me back. The first one, a teepee of sticks under that warped tree, was shocking enough. But my friend claimed to have spotted another, bigger construction further up, near a grove of aspens that had been bent almost into an arch. He was nervous about returning, so I decided to check it out alone. I still wonder if that was a huge mistake. Reaching the arch took longer than usual, because the trail felt wetter than ever. Mud sucked at my boots with each step, like the land was trying to hold me back. When I finally got there, I noticed the arch wasn't just a random shape. Long branches had been wedged crosswise, forming a kind of lattice. Slabs of fresh aspen bark draped across the top like roofing tiles, channeling the rainwater so it ran off in neat rivulets. It definitely wasn't natural. My chest tightened at the idea of something with clever hands building that. The silence felt like it might smother me on the spot. Even though it scared me, I crouched down to look inside. It looked barely tall enough for a person on all fours. Maybe an adult could sit comfortably, but not stand. Either way, it was sturdy. As I stood to leave, I caught a whiff of something unfamiliar, earthy, kind of damp and animalistic. It was enough to make me back away, uneasy that whatever stayed in there might come home at any moment. On the return trip, I heard frantic wood knocks from above, almost like a warning or maybe a scolding for trespassing. That's when I glanced up the slope and spotted a silhouette. At first, I assumed it was just a broken trunk. The shape blended perfectly with the surrounding trees. Then it glided sideways behind a thicker trunk, with such effortless motion that my head spun. For several seconds I stood there, trying not to lose it. The presence of that shape, tall, quiet and cunning, twisted my nerves into knots I still haven't worked out. I might have tried to rationalize it away, except there were other details I couldn't ignore. Foot-shaped impressions in the muck that vanished like someone had deliberately erased them. Shredded bark on wide trunks at heights no average animal would reach. One of the worst discoveries was a half-eaten rabbit's carcass, propped near the path where I couldn't miss it. I'd walked that spot earlier, and it definitely hadn't been there before. The notion that someone might be placing these gruesome finds on purpose made my skin crawl. Word about my experiences spread among friends, and soon I was getting messages from people who wanted proof. Pictures, hair samples, footprints, anything. I refused to bring a camera anymore, remembering the deer bones from my last attempt. I had zero desire to push this phenomenon any further than I already had. That trail still calls to me every time I pass by those mountain ridges. It's not peaceful. It's far from it. It feels like stepping onto ground that belongs to something else, something you sense just outside your vision. I keep telling folks that, no matter how curious they are, they should think twice before hunting for cryptic answers there. Curiosity might lead you straight to a truth you're not ready to handle. And once you've glimpsed that shape shifting behind the trees, or found those bones laid out for you, you can't pretend it was just your imagination. You carry it with you forever. I hopped off the train in Olympia feeling pretty confident that I could handle whatever lay ahead. Figured if I could manage the moody weather and notoriously fickle schedules of public transit, a few crashing waves in Westport would be no big deal. Truth be told, I'd been itching for something new, something unexpected. Surfing in the cold waters of coastal Washington sounded like the perfect fix. After a quick cup of cheap coffee, I stuck out my thumb along the highway, and an old truck eventually pulled over. The driver, a lean man in a flannel jacket, wasted no time telling me there wasn't much going on at the shore this time of year. I laughed it off, but he just shrugged and said some folks liked their solitude a little too much. The comment hung in the air, weirdly unsettling. Maybe he was just making conversation, but his words rattled around my head the rest of the ride. When we reached Westport, I thanked him and climbed out. The wind greeted me like a slap, sharp and relentless, carrying the tang of salt from the water. After I found a shop willing to rent me a surfboard for the day, I sprinted straight for the shore with more excitement than caution. That was my first mistake. The Pacific in May was nothing short of frigid, and the waves slammed me like I'd insulted them personally. Still, I stuck with it, if only out of stubbornness. By late afternoon, every inch of me was exhausted. My face stung from the wind, and my arms felt like heavy weights from paddling. The thought of a warm bed seemed like wishful thinking at that point. A local suggested heading south to Grayland State Park if I wanted an out-of-the-way place to crash, pay for a campground, or skip the fee by stealth camping if I was feeling bold. Naturally, bold won out. I hitched another short ride down Highway 105, noticing how the trees along the road grew thick and twisted, their branches leaning over the asphalt as though trying to keep secrets locked under their canopy. Not that they were towering giants, far from it. But they formed a continuous tangle that blocked out a good portion of the sky. Something about those woods made my mouth feel dry, even though I couldn't pin down why. Grayland turned out to be nearly deserted. One bulky RV stood near the entrance with its blinds closed, as if whoever was inside didn't want to see or be seen. A tent further down looked zipped up for the night, no sign of movement. The air there felt different, less briny, more earthy, like damp soil and leaves, with a sharp undertone of marine chill. I decided to scope out the trail leading to the beach. By then, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows that danced along the edges of the trees. The wind pushed me forward, almost urging me to get on with it. I found a decent spot a short distance away from the surf, marked by a weirdly shaped rock and a flimsy post fluttering with a bit of pink ribbon. I dropped my gear, a battered sleeping bag, ground tarp, and the wetsuit I hadn't bothered returning yet, thinking it would be easy enough to find them later. Before dark truly set in, I headed to the bathroom hoping I could charge my phone. No dice. The overhead light flickered, but the outlets were dead. No caretaker or ranger in sight. I took a moment to rest against the concrete wall, listening to the wind whine through the empty campground. A tiny voice in my mind asked why nobody else was around. Sure, it was off-season, but it felt downright abandoned. I lit up a cheap cigar, watching the last rays of sunlight fade. My nerves buzzed with anticipation. Maybe from the lack of real food, maybe from that edgy stillness that only comes when a place feels untouched by casual human presence. Occasionally I heard the muffled sound of the waves crashing, and I pretended it was lulling me into a sense of calm. A weak illusion. Once darkness settled in, I realized I couldn't stall forever. I'd have to brave the narrow trail again, guided only by what little moonlight seeped through the canopy. My stomach twisted at the prospect of stumbling around blindly, but I tried to laugh it off. It's just a half-tamed strip of coastal forest, I told myself. What's the worst thing that can happen? With that, I pushed off the bathroom's damp concrete wall and started walking, the wind picking up as though it wanted me to hurry. Everything around me felt on edge, like the environment itself was waiting for me to make a wrong move. I had a flash of the driver's words from earlier. Some folks like their solitude a bit too much. The phrase made me glance over my shoulder, scanning the dimly lit campsite. I didn't spot a soul, but I still couldn't shake the nagging sense that something beyond my knowledge thrived in that emptiness. Determined to camp as planned, I took my first steps into the dark. Little did I know just how quickly my confidence would unravel once the trees swallowed me whole. The second I stepped beyond the tree line, The campground lights and that tiny thread of comfort they offered vanished behind me. It was as though I'd walked into a different reality, one where the wind seemed louder, and the darkness felt tangible, like it had weight. I kept my hands stretched out in front of me, trying to avoid slamming into a trunk, but my breath still caught at every near miss. Each shuffle forward was a calculated gamble. The path underfoot was uneven, and I had zero sense of how far I'd come. Despite knowing I just had to continue west, I soon lost all sense of direction. In theory, if I kept moving, I'd stumble onto the shore eventually. Instead, I found myself trudging in circles, spooked by the sensation that the trees were closing in. My arms brushed rough bark, tangles of branches snagged my clothing, and the roar of the wind overhead drowned out any hints that might have helped me navigate. When I finally emerged from that labyrinth of twisted foliage, relief flooded me, until I realized the landmarks I'd counted on spotting, my weird rock and that little post with the streamer, weren't there. My eyes darted across the moonlit sand, looking for anything familiar, but the beach stretched on emptily. Salt-scented gusts lashed against me, making it impossible to see much of anything. Frustrated, I inched back into the woods, flipping on my phone screen for a feeble glow. That light barely reached a few steps ahead, revealing only a tangle of wet ferns and shadows. At one point, something off in the distance made a noise, a low, resonant call that rose above the wind, oddly stretched and loud. It could have been my mind twisting normal forest sounds into something ominous, but it sent a surge of alarm through my body anyway. I told myself it was an owl or maybe a coyote, but even I didn't believe it. It didn't have the trademark yip or screech. This was different, a drawn-out tone that felt impossible to ignore. I crept forward, trying to keep calm, my feet rooted in place whenever I heard a rustle or detected a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. As the seconds dragged on, I noticed a pungent odor, damp and somehow animalistic. The wind couldn't carry it away fast enough. It gnawed at the edges of my thinking, fueling the idea that something far larger than an owl was lurking beyond my flashlight's pitiful radius. Then I heard the same unnerving sound again, but this time, it reverberated from behind me, closer than before. It was a low, wavering moan that crescendoed in a way I couldn't have imagined an ordinary creature producing. My chest felt tight with a surge of adrenaline. I stumbled forward in a desperate attempt to get out of there, tangling my foot on an exposed root. My shoulder smacked against a trunk, and pain jolted down my arm, but I refused to stop. My only plan was to keep moving until I reached the beach, or open ground, somewhere I could see whatever was out there. A short time later, I burst onto the sand again, breathless and shaking. My phone's light flickered off, so I was left with only the faint glow of the moon. The ocean lay in front of me, a slab of shifting darkness. For a moment I stood still, scanning the shoreline. The waves roared, but they couldn't drown out that faint call echoing in the wind. Somehow I knew it was trailing me. I forced myself to walk along the beach, eyes straining for that stupid rock, anything to anchor my bearings. My entire body felt raw, like every nerve ending was ready to snap. At one point I noticed what looked like a large shape dart between the trunks at the edge of the woods, but the swirl of sand and gusts made it impossible to confirm. If it had been my imagination, it was doing a damn good job of tormenting me. After what felt like hours of staggering along the sand, the rock finally came into view. That stone never looked so beautiful. My makeshift camp was right where I'd left it, which meant shelter for the night. Not much, but better than wandering out in the open. I sank onto my ground tarp, pressing a hand to my shoulder, trying to massage away the pain. My lungs still felt like they were on fire. For a long time I sat there, straining to catch any hint of the unknown noise. All I heard was the restless tide and the occasional gust slicing through the trees. At some point I dragged my sleeping bag over me and huddled inside. Normally, I might have drifted off to the hiss of waves, but fear kept me rigid. Every brush of wind through the nearby grass made me jump. I couldn't guarantee I was safe, but at least the open sky gave me a fighting chance to spot trouble before it reached me. Eventually, The brutal exhaustion won out. My eyes grew heavy, even though my pulse was still racing. Before I slipped into a restless doze, I grabbed my pocket knife and laid it beside me, just in case. The reality of what lurked in those woods was far from settled, and I had a feeling the night wasn't ready to let me off easy. My eyes snapped open at first light, though I couldn't say I truly slept. The wind had died to a low whistle, and the morning sky was a dull gray, casting just enough light for me to see I was still in one piece. My shoulder throbbed from last night's collision with that tree, and my legs ached in a way that told me I'd gone too hard trying to outrun something I couldn't even see. Shaking off the lingering fog in my head, I sat up and scanned the beach. It was eerily quiet. Normally, sunrise over the Pacific is breathtaking, pinkish clouds, golden water. But that morning, it felt subdued, like even the day was hesitant about showing up. Part of me hoped I'd find solid proof that the terror I'd felt in those woods was just my own overactive imagination. Then I noticed something odd near the water's edge. Impressions in the wet sand, bigger than I'd expect from any person walking around. They were spaced too far apart to be from a casual stroll. My pulse jumped. They could have been smoothed or warped by the tide, sure, but as I got closer, I realized they had a vague foot-like shape to them. Elongated, broad. I crouched down, suddenly aware of how alone I was on that stretch of beach. My heart pounded harder when I noticed a line of these prints leading toward the tree line, exactly where I'd fled last night. I wanted to dismiss them, blame them on shifting sand or an odd trick of the current, but the winds howling in my memory and that unexplainable call I'd heard still weighed on me. Standing there, cold water lapping around my ankles, I felt more shaken than ever. Whatever had prowled those woods might have been right there on the beach, watching me as I bolted around in the dark. I hurried back to my makeshift camp and stuffed everything into my pack. There was no chance I'd linger another minute in that spot. Every snap of a twig, every gust of wind behind me made my skin prickle. Turning my back on that gnarled coastal forest felt both necessary and dangerous. Like something might leap out at me before I was out of reach. The walk through the trees in daylight was nowhere near as terrifying as at night, but my nerves were still on high alert. The occasional shaft of morning sun revealed just how twisted and close those branches were. Conifer needles and salt-laden air formed a pungent mix that sat heavy in my lungs. Even then, even with the sunlight, I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. When I finally re-emerged into Grayland's campground, I almost didn't recognize the place. The single RV was gone. The site where the couple had been sleeping looked deserted as well. No people. No sign they'd ever been there. Maybe they packed up at dawn, or maybe they were gone long before I even woke. That chill at the back of my neck prickled again, making me wonder if I'd imagined the RV and the tent entirely. I didn't waste time. I hoofed it out to the highway and flagged down a passing truck, the driver throwing me a curious look when I practically jumped into the cab. I mumbled something about needing to get out of Grayland fast. He didn't press for details, and I didn't offer any. We ended up stopping in a small coastal town not too far away. There was a diner there, fluorescent lights buzzing, the scent of bacon and coffee in the air. I sank into a booth, hands still shaking as I wrapped them around a steaming mug. When the waitress asked if I was okay, I managed a half smile and said something like, "Long night." She nodded like she'd heard it all before. A couple old-timers at the counter kept glancing over, probably picking up on my rattled vibe. Eventually, I summoned the nerve to ask them if they'd ever heard weird noises in the Grayland area. Their eyes flickered with a hint of recognition. One said he'd heard all sorts of stories. Sightings of large ape-like figures near the dunes, strange howls at odd hours. The other shrugged, calling them tall tales, but his mouth set in a way that said he wasn't entirely convinced of that. Later, after I'd changed into dry clothes and recharged my phone, I typed in every search term I could think of. Grayland screech, Bigfoot calls, Westport forest noises. The audio clips I found, those alleged Bigfoot whoops or howls, sent a jolt straight through me. Some had the same weird resonant pitch I'd heard piercing the wind the night before. My throat went tight just listening to them. I can't say with 100% certainty what chased me through those tangled trees, or if anything literally followed me at all. But when I think back on that searing cry, on those footprints in the damp sand, and on the acrid smell that clung to the air, I can't deny something was out there, something bigger and stranger than a mere owl or deer. By the time I finally found a bus back toward Olympia, the morning sun had grown strong, casting long rays over the highway. I should have felt more at ease, but I realized I was still shaking. I kept replaying the night in my head. If I'd made one wrong move, taken one bad tumble, I might have still been out there, huddled in the dark with whatever that thing was. Even now, safe at home and scrolling through internet forums, I can't shake the feeling that I glimpsed another side of that rugged Washington coastline, a side that rarely meets human eyes. Sure, I walked away rattled, but I walked away all the same, which is more than I can say for some folks who've vanished in thick forests and never shown up again. I didn't get the grand surf adventure I'd hoped for, and I doubt I'll be heading back to those dunes anytime soon. Still, that memory of hearing that unearthly cry slicing through the howling wind, the trackway in the sand, and the sense of a presence lurking in the gloom has carved itself into my story forever. It's a reminder that sometimes, out on the edges of the map, you're a guest in someone else's realm, and you don't always see your host until it's far too late. I remember the heat pressing down like a weight that afternoon, making every breath feel thick. My friend and I had set out for a casual hike a few miles from downtown Salt Lake City, figuring we'd escape the traffic noise and chaos for a while. The trail was narrow, weaving through dense undergrowth that tugged at our clothes, and we hadn't been walking long before sweat started trickling into our eyes. We finally stopped in a small clearing, where clusters of tall firs stood close enough to form a canopy overhead. I squinted at them, noticing how some trunks seemed angled against each other, almost like a teepee. My friend and I tossed around theories. Maybe campers had dragged them into that shape, or some weird storm had left them like that. None of our guesses felt convincing, and something about the arrangement set my nerves on edge. We'd just leaned against fallen logs to rest, when a tremendous crash shattered the stillness. Branches rattled, needles spiraled down, and I felt a jolt of alarm. My head snapped toward the noise, eyes searching for the source. Deep in the undergrowth, I spotted movement. In the gloom of overlapping branches, a form about 6 feet tall darted through the brush. It had dark brown hair, patches of lighter fur around its midsection, then darker again along its legs. My mind immediately tried to twist it into something familiar, but the temperature alone made it impossible that anyone would be trekking around in a heavy outfit. I called out, my voice tight. "Hello? Anybody there?" My friend was already on his feet, pushing aside low-hanging branches to get a better look. No response. It was eerie how fast everything returned to total silence. We inched forward, scanning the area for footprints or broken limbs. The only clue we found was a wide depression in the thick layer of needles. A single mark, deeper and larger than the shape of my size 11 sandals. We strained our ears, hoping for a second crash, or at least the sound of something stomping away. Nothing. The forest around us seemed emptied of life. With the hairs on my arms prickling, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a stray hiker in an odd costume, or a shadow playing tricks on me. But my gut told me we'd crossed paths with something else. Despite the unease creeping through my body, we decided to keep moving. The trail ahead felt safer than lingering in that strange, silent pocket. I remember glancing back every few steps, half expecting that hairy figure to appear again. It never did. But from that moment on, the simple day hike I'd planned turned into a slow walk with my senses on high alert, always waiting for another crash in the undergrowth. Over the next few days, I found it almost impossible to focus on everyday life. My mind kept drifting back to that strange figure slipping through the firs, the odd print in the needles, and the question of what, or who, was lurking out there. Every time I tried to dismiss it, I'd remember how intense that moment felt, and get that uneasy twist in my stomach all over again. It wasn't something I could write off as a trick of the light, or a fleeting shadow. Finally, my friend and I agreed we had to head back. I wasn't about to do it alone, so we brought along 2 more people who were up for the challenge. They were both skeptics at first, rolling their eyes when we mentioned fur and footprints, but once we described how massive that impression was, and how quickly the figure had vanished, they got quiet. We stocked up on extra supplies, strong flashlights, fully charged phones for video, and a firm resolution that this time, we'd be prepared for whatever we might find. We started early in the morning, hoping to reach the tree formation before the midday sun turned the trail into an oven. The 4 of us hiked in a line, maneuvering through dense brush like it was some uncharted terrain. Conversation was minimal. We'd crack small jokes here and there, but there was this underlying nervous energy, like we all suspected something was off and didn't want to jinx it by talking too much. Eventually, we reached the spot where we'd rested on the previous trip. The clearing with the bizarre teepee configuration. It looked different somehow, like the branches had shifted or more had been added. I couldn't help but wonder if something had returned to rearrange them. They were large, twisted limbs, not something you'd expect to be thrown together on a whim. The silence around us felt thick, like the atmosphere itself was warning us that this place wasn't ours to linger in. One of our new companions, Sarah, noticed a cluster of cracked branches piled in a weird pattern on the ground. It looked intentional, almost like the start of another structure. A few steps away, I saw old bark stripped off a trunk in a way that didn't look natural. We started taking photos and poking around, trying to see if there were any signs of footprints in the dirt or new scuffs on the bark. That's when we caught the faint sound of movement from up the slope, a shuffle or a shift in the leaves, low and heavy. We froze as a group, exchanging glances that held the same anxious thought. We weren't alone. We aimed our flashlights toward the dense undergrowth, their beams cutting through shadows. Nothing. Not even a startled bird fluttering away. Still, none of us relaxed. We found ourselves whispering like we were worried that raising our voices might provoke something. With that uneasy weight hanging over us, we headed into a small ravine, the same direction I was pretty sure our mystery creature had darted before. My pulse throbbed as the shadows deepened. The place reeked of damp soil and old foliage, a scent that somehow felt claustrophobic. It wasn't long before the daylight started fading. The canyon walls blocked out a lot of the afternoon sun, and I realized we'd spent more time in that area than we'd planned. The thought of getting caught in near-dark conditions while searching for a massive unknown creature sent a bolt of anxiety through me. Another half hour of picking our way through thick vegetation, and we collectively decided we'd tested our luck enough. We turned around to head back, taking measured steps, all of us glancing over our shoulders every few seconds. The undergrowth seemed thicker now, or maybe it was just our nerves. Every snapped twig felt like an alarm, each rustle a potential threat waiting just beyond our sight. But despite the near-constant tension, we never saw a distinct shape or heard anything more than a stray crack of wood. When we finally reached the clearer part of the trail, the sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched across the ground. We hurried out, not exactly running, but not taking a leisurely pace either. By the time we got to the trailhead parking area, nobody was in the mood to talk about what we'd seen, or hadn't seen. We just stood by our cars, exchanging uneasy glances like we'd all silently agreed. There was definitely something out there, and we weren't sure how close we'd come to it this time. Driving home, I kept reliving the moments we'd spent next to that tangle of broken branches, the silence pressing down on us, and that single distant noise that carried just enough heft to remind us we were intruders. Even if we hadn't caught more than a glimpse, it felt like a step further into a mystery that might be bigger than anything we were prepared for. And yet, a part of me knew we'd be back. Because once you sense something that strange, it's impossible to just walk away and forget. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were dancing around the edge of something huge. After we got home from that second hike, the tension in my chest wouldn't let up. Every time I tried to sleep, I pictured the twisted branches, the strange footprints, the hushed rustle on the slope. Part of me was flat out terrified, but another part was hooked. I needed to know what we were dealing with. Needed to see it with my own eyes, once and for all. It took some convincing, okay, borderline begging. But my friends agreed to go back one last time. This time, we planned it differently. No more flirting with sunset. We'd go in early, in broad daylight, do a thorough sweep, and be out before darkness had a chance to swallow us. We told ourselves that if we still couldn't find solid answers, we'd accept the mystery and move on. At least that was the plan. We set out at dawn, the rising sun casting warm light on the dusty trailhead. Even the walk leading up to the fir forest felt loaded with suspense, like the trees themselves knew our intentions. The forest canopy was still thick, though patches of light trickled in, illuminating swirling dust motes in the early morning air. It should have felt peaceful, but I was coiled tight with anticipation. By the time we reached the teepee-like structure, the sun was fully up. The weird arrangement of logs and branches looked even more deliberate in daylight. My friend, Sarah, who had been so skeptical before, just stood there shaking her head. She murmured something about how there was no way this was natural. It felt more like a constructed boundary marker than anything random. We combed the area systematically, marking any impressions, picking up bits of fur caught on broken branches. Yeah, fur. Not just a stray tuft here or there, but enough to notice a pattern. It was coarse, dark with lighter tips. We collected it carefully in small plastic bags, our minds spinning with possibilities. There was a smell too, musky, pungent, like wet dog mixed with rotting leaves. It made my stomach churn, but it also felt like proof that we weren't chasing ghosts. Eventually, we descended into that narrow ravine where we'd heard something moving on the second trip. It was cooler there, the sunlight hitting the ground only in scattered patches. The deeper we went, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. Giant boulders jutted out at odd angles, and fallen trees formed natural barricades, like something had been shaping the path to discourage visitors. That's when I saw it, just a flicker of motion from the corner of my eye. My throat went bone dry. I raised my hand to signal everyone else to stop. We stood dead still, every nerve on high alert. Between two tall firs, partially hidden by a thick screen of leaves, was a silhouette. Tall, stocky, covered in that same two-toned hair. It wasn't running this time, it was watching us. My heart pounded so hard I could feel my pulse in my temples. The creature shifted, stepping forward just enough for me to make out a thick, powerful frame. I couldn't see its eyes clearly, but I sensed the tension in its stance. My friend whispered, "Oh my God," and started fumbling for her phone, but I gently put my hand on her arm to still her. Something in the creature's posture told me it wasn't thrilled to see us, yet it wasn't charging either. It felt like a standoff. Then it made this deep, resonant sound, an almost guttural warning. The trees around us seemed to vibrate with the force of it. I swear I felt the noise more than heard it, like a low tremor through the ground. My legs wobbled, a primal instinct screaming that I was in the presence of something that could hurt me if it wanted to. But it didn't move closer. It stared for a long moment, as if weighing whether we posed a real threat. I raised my arms in a slow, open gesture, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. My entire body was on the verge of bolting, but I forced myself to hold my ground. The creature gave a strange huff, then slid back into the brush, ascending the slope with a speed and grace that left us standing there breathless. One moment, it was there. The next, the forest swallowed it whole. We didn't chase it. I think a few of us realized at the same time that chasing would be a monumentally bad idea. Instead, we just stood, gripping one another's arms, marveling that the standoff had ended without violence. My brain buzzed with a mix of relief, awe, and lingering fear. Part of me wished we had some perfect, crystal-clear footage to show the world. Another part knew it was enough just to have seen it and walked away in one piece. After a few shaky breaths, we gathered what composure we could and decided to head back. None of us wanted to press our luck. On the way down, we found the courage to talk quietly about what we'd seen. The footprints, the smell, the fur, and finally, that face, almost hidden behind the leaves. It felt like we'd intruded on another intelligence, something that had staked out its home here, way too close to civilization for comfort, but hidden by the thick undergrowth. It was near midday when we emerged onto the main trail. The sun shone brighter than I'd expected, the warmth on my shoulders a stark reminder that we hadn't been gone long in terms of hours. Yet it felt like we'd lived an entire lifetime in that ravine. The rest of the hike was silent, except for the rhythmic crunch of our boots, and the occasional shaky laugh whenever someone muttered, "What just happened?" At the parking lot we regrouped around our cars, unsaid questions hanging in the air. We had hair samples and faint phone videos of leaves moving, but nothing that could truly capture what we experienced. Honestly, it hardly mattered. We knew we'd touched something beyond our day-to-day lives, and there was a powerful, almost sacred finality in leaving it behind undisturbed. By that afternoon, we promised we'd keep our eyes and ears open for other stories, other signs. But we all agreed, we wouldn't intrude again. It was like we'd signed an unspoken pact with that forest. Respect its boundaries. Let the creature live, as it was meant to. And maybe, just maybe, it would keep granting us safe passage. I haven't been back since, but I can't say I won't ever go. The memory still lingers in the back of my mind, especially when I'm alone at night. Every now and then, I relive that moment of eye contact, if you can call it that, and wonder if it might happen again. Strange as it sounds, there's a small part of me that hopes it does. Because for one brief moment, fear and fascination collided, and I realized there are still corners of our world that remain wild, vast, and deeply mysterious. Thank you for staying with me until the end. I hope tonight's stories kept you company in the dark. Sleep well, and if you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe. Good night, and see you in the next one.